if you want to be more involved in your local community and you want to have action that matters, and you're sitting at home doing your podcast and thinking, how can I create something that is meaningful, that touches people's lives, that inspires people to take action, that drives them, empowers them to connect to people in your local space, but also all around the world? Well, you can do exactly that. And that is exactly the message that the Obama Presidential Center wants to send the world. They want to make sure that people have the capabilities to create something to inspire people. And so this week's episode of the podcast space is recorded, I wouldn't say live, but directly at the Obama Presidential Center. So my name is Anna Xavier. I'm the founder of the podcast space. And in this podcast, I teach you about strategic ways to leverage a podcast for influence, to inspire your community, and to really change the world into a better place to be. So let's dive into this week's episode of the podcast space here at the Obama Presidential Center. You may have heard that podcasts are great tools for building influence, networking with individuals. But one thing that is kind of overlooked is the idea that people can use shows that may be smaller, maybe more local, to build their communities up, to bring awareness to initiatives that are being done in their local spaces. And so as someone who has, over 15 years of experience in podcasting, I've created content in Portugal, in London, and now in the US. And I have realized that truly shows, they will always find its audience. But it's important that you, as the host, understand that just speaking, it does not give you an audience. We need to create content that will actually benefit the communities. And so if you already have a message and you have something that you want to share, awesome. I want to talk about how we understand influence. And so when we create content, we have to think about what is our goal. We live in a time that is incredible because today we are able to access a medium that is very democratic. I am recording, for instance, from my phone. I am recording this in the studio, but I could use a little microphone, whether it's a lavalier or even my own microphone from my phone, to actually record the thing that I want to say and to inspire change.
Hey, future Anna coming to you through the magic of post-production. So the day that I recorded that podcast episode at the Obama Presidential Center, I was also invited, and dare I say, to the honor of my lifetime, my professional life. And I got to meet President Obama. It was through a small cohort of creators. And it was just wonderful to get to speak to him about his plans for the space, how he hopes that people will use all the facilities in the campus. And whether you're a local or you're just visiting, you can really explore so many parts of the Presidential Center. And this is the moment where, before I play you a very interesting clip from that conversation, I want to just drive home this point. I often tell you on these podcasts that it does not matter how big your podcast is. It does not matter how many famous people you have on the show. My podcast, The Podcast Space, is not the biggest podcast out there. I am not the most influential people in the industry. However, because of my work and because I focus so much in providing you and many other underrepresented communities a voice and a platform and a way in to increase your visibility, to increase your influence, because of that work, the Obama Foundation reached out to me and invited me to be part of this roundtable. And it's just proof that if you stick to your vision and if you do it long enough and do it well, opportunities will come around no matter the size of your show and your platform. So without further ado, let's play this clip of the conversation with President Barack Obama.
Hey people, how we doing?
How's it going? Kevin.
Good to see you, Kevin.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, Emily.
How are you, Emily?
Nice to meet you.
Dave, nice to see you.
Anna.
Anna,
Amanda.
so nice to see you. Please, have a seat.
Oh my gosh.
It's so much fun to see you guys. Usually I just sit around and we just chat, but I understand that we are a little more organized this time than usual because each of you represent in the podcasts or posts that you do some really specific interests that I think are relevant to what we're trying to do here. So we're going to go in order so that each of you guys, as I understand it, will kind of get something that's on point for your audience, and then we can have fun and just open it up and talk about whatever we want.
Sure.
Does that sound good? All right.
I'm part of the podcast industry. So I primarily work with underrepresented communities, leaders who tend to be multilingual or women.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting to see how podcasting has become part of the ecosystem where traditional media used to be placed, right?
Yeah.
And as young people and people in communities that perhaps were not able to be represented in media, how do you hope that they use the space? And not just the recording studio for all the arts that are possible, right. Podcasting, music, even audiobooks. Yeah. How do you hope they use the space to connect more to the community?
Well, the power of podcasting is the power of the human voice and the power of stories. And what I love about podcasting is it's got a low barrier to entry. And that is revolutionary. The notion that you've got a story to tell, you get a microphone and you record that story. And if it's a good enough story, you might have somebody in Bangladesh or Munich listening to that story, a very specific story about a very local event that achieves some universal meaning to people and gets them to see something they didn't see before. That's not just the source of great art, it's the source of community, and it's the source of social trust, and it's the source of, ultimately, democracy and social cohesion. So we wanted to make sure that we had facilities here where people could tell stories. And not only do we have a recording studio, but we also, at the end of the exhibits, we've got that storytelling booth where we want people to be able to tell their stories. At the start of our exhibits, we have a prompt about a little interactive table for people to think about the stories of their family and where they're coming from. A lot of the training we do with the young leaders that work with us and that are part of our programming, and some of them are already doing amazing things. I mean, they're organizing climate change initiatives across Europe, or they're providing health care for underserved communities in sub-Saharan Africa. So they're already having huge impact, but it's interesting. One of the most important things we do in our programming, the first thing we do, is to get people to be intentional about listening to other people's stories and telling their own. And we go through a series of exercises just to get that habit. So, all of which is to say, the recording studio is an extension of a broader philosophy, that everybody's voice counts, everybody has a sacred story, everybody has a perspective. And part of, I think, what I'm hoping for is people recognizing that you don't have to yell. You don't have to put people down. You don't have to say the most controversial thing that comes to mind, even if you don't actually believe it. That's not the only way to get people to hear you or see you. That, you actually have something more valuable than that to offer, and there's an audience for that. But we have to have some trust and faith in that, and hopefully this becomes kind of an incubator for that mindset of how do we talk to each other and listen to each other about the stories we got to tell, and find both differences that we have to respect, but also, more often than not, find common ground.
Mm-hmm. Kind of tied into what you were saying, design inspires people, empowers people, helps them make better decisions, or at least like more aspirational decisions.
Right.
And one of the things that I think is incredible about this space is that it feels like you can have, recorded conversations, or you can have offline conversations, right? You can have all of those conversations that can inspire then, for instance, like a podcast series, or, spoken word or poetry or whatever it is, like the creative arts. Really, you feel that in the space because, everything is very open, and so it inspires a lot of connection. And then it can lead to someone choosing to record in a studio or actually do it in an open space. And maybe I feel like it can really incentivize one-to-one conversation and just learning more about the neighborhood, I guess.
Well, part of what we want to do is we want to trigger ideas when people are here, or feelings or connections that maybe they weren't seeing before. It's the same reason why we've got a bunch of public art, most of which is going to be accessible even for people who aren't going through the museum. I think about 80% of the public art, people can come here for free and they can just enjoy. There's a well-known artist, works mostly in photography, named Carrie Mae Weems, who has a installation that she just put up at the top, sort of the sky room where you can see the views. It's one floor up. And I hadn't seen it, so she was there to show me the installation, and it was beautiful. And as I was looking at it, she had a little speaker next to the installation, and it was playing this beautiful jazz suite, kind of a meditative, haunting melody. It was really pretty. And I said, well, this is amazing. Who is this? Because I might download this. I really like it. And she said, well, no, after I'd finished this, I realized that I wanted sounds to connect to the visuals, and so I commissioned these 4 jazz friends of mine to write a piece to go with this. It was so beautiful that, and this wasn't our idea, that now we're going to actually have it sort of as a background sound for the entire floor. That's not something like, at the beginning of the design of the space, we just come up with on some, memo, right? That's her just feeling something and then having an inspiration and collaborating with somebody working in a different medium, and suddenly you got magic. That's an example in large and small ways that we hope happens, right?
How do you feel about that conversation? I certainly felt super inspired. At moments, I blacked out because I was like, oh my gosh, I am in the presence of the former president. It was unbelievable. It was such an incredible conversation, and it just proves that you can have agency over your life, over your communities. You can inspire and transform your communities through content. I would definitely invite you to listen back to some sections of what the president mentioned. But now let's get into the practical side of it. How do you actually go out and get engaged with your communities, with local organizations? That's exactly what I covered on this next section of the podcast.
And we know that trust is created from consistency. And so creating a podcast that shows other people how to do things, that you get creative, but also you showcase how to elevate the messages of others. It does not need to be just you. You can be a helper. Impact does not need to be about huge downloads, about having a huge audience. It can be about communicating what's local to you. And as of 2023, podcasters have been considered the number 1 most trusted people on the internet. So audiences really look up for those who record content to really tell them the air quotes, the truth, or what is going on, topics that traditional media does not cover. And as someone who is an immigrant, I've created content in English and Portuguese. I've also been speaking in Spanish, but communities have different elements that makes them tick, right? As I've worked with podcasters, I've come to realize that the little things are actually the things that connect us the most. Because think about it, when you met a friend, there was something that they told you that was really meaningful and you identified with. And something as simple as telling a friend your favorite coffee shop and go and visit there, that can change the business for the better, because then it's all about cumulative change, right? So tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend, and suddenly that business has a lot of locals. And that's exactly the same thing with podcasting. Your message will be passed on from person to person, from listener to listener, and reach so many more people than you ever thought. And in a time where we think about access to information, access to tools, access to all of the things that we have on the internet, it has never been easier to find an audience and to find our community. And that's the next thing that I find that is super, super important as a podcaster. You have the ability to create your own community. So think about it, whether you live in Chicago, whether you live somewhere else in the country or the world, you're actually able to connect to people who are so far away, but you just have the same interests. And whether that is your business, whether you're trying to connect to people who just like gardening, you are able to create a path to get to those people that have the same interests as you. And so there's something to be said about having agency in those decisions, right? Podcasting is about creating bridges, whether that is digital bridges, in-person bridges. Doing my show, for instance, has enabled me to meet so many of my podcast listeners, so many of my guests in person, so we can facilitate moving from the digital to the personal. I mean, going to meet other people that have the same interest as you can be incredible for your mental health, for your creativity. And so I highly recommend that you do that. I wanted to invite you to not, again, look at the downloads, but ask yourself, have you been using these podcasts in the most strategic way? And it can be to record plenty of interviews with people who you admire. It can be to create a space where you get to practice your public speaking or your thought leadership. But true change comes from looking around us and say, how can we take the next step now? And so I invite you to think about how can you create in-person podcast recordings, whether it's with a live audience or whether you're actually booking a space like this studio and bringing those online recordings to an in-person space. Let's kind of go over some of the options. Where can you record podcast episodes? So, of course, you have podcast studios that actually they do offer these services. But if you want that flexibility, you can always, in the US, go to your local library. Most local libraries do have an option to create content in that space. Some libraries have video podcasting studios. Some libraries have just audio only. So again, you can do like I did. And the space right now is set up only for audio at the moment, but I'm filming myself. So it's all how you want to do it. There's also some cafes that actually have a podcast studio in the back. That's, especially in the UK, I've seen those. I find that is so exciting, so interesting. Some bars also offer some recordings, again, for a specific community. But I want to challenge you to think about, what if you were to record in public spaces? Many places that I go, they're open air, parks. I see people with a table and they invite others to come and record an episode with them or have a conversation. It helps us be more empathetic. It helps us be a bit more brave because we're talking to a stranger, and it can lead to incredible connections, especially as we learn to create content and connect to our community on the go. So we are getting out of the house and recording content like that. So look around, start asking people, hey, I'm looking for a space to record. Where could I do this? Theaters sometimes can be rented throughout the day if they're not being used, or cinemas. That would be great if you have a podcast all about the movies, cafes, public spaces like squares, and just kind of like at the steps of a museum. Like, how exciting can that be to record in a space that has a lot of motion going on? I want you to think about, if you're trying to create content that brings awareness about nonprofits or organizations that are civically engaged, think about how you can actually tag along and say, hey, do you have an activation event maybe at the farmer's market? Set up a table there, talk to people. Those types of content can really go a long way and get to meet your neighbors. I would also want you to think about what would be organizations that would benefit from your knowledge, that would benefit from your connection. Don't go at it alone. And so think about, how can you move from doing it all by yourself to engaging the community, either, consistently, strategically, seasonally, or for just one podcast episode, and highlight the organizations that are meaningful to you. So if you decide to step into a different role and try something new, it is important that we bring our audience along. And so we invite them over and say, hey, if you'd like to listen to more of these stories, I'm thinking about doing a series that highlights local leaders. What do you think? Let me know. And then, as always, tell them exactly how they can reach out to you, right? Those specific guidelines are important to tell people exactly where to find you, where you'll talk. And they will be more invested in contributing. So ask them recommendations, ask them what questions would you love to hear about, right? But also allow yourself to play a little more with your show concept. So if you're bored of recording an episode in your home, know that you can go around and you can record in public spaces. Now, since we are at the Obama Presidential Center, I wanted to talk about the hope to action values. And as I was reading through this, I was like, you know what? They apply so well to podcasting. So they have 10 values. So it's courage, empathy, integrity, accountability, community, inclusivity, pragmatism, resilience, imagination, and hope. And I want to touch on this on how can you get there through podcasting, because it's such an incredible tool to really make the change that we want to see in the world. So let's start. All right. Number one, courage. You are practicing your values in a public forum, right? In a public setting. Every time you create a podcast episode about something that you really resonate with, you are showing your community that you have confidence. Even if you're not a podcaster by trade, if communication is not something you do, you are sharing your knowledge. You are showing up, whether that's on audio or on video. Empathy. So when you're having conversations with other people, sometimes you're going to have conversations that are completely different than the background you have. So you're going to develop more empathy because you're going to understand their side. You're going to have conversations that are meaningful. You're going to be able to understand points of view that maybe in your regular life you wouldn't have, right? It's our shared humanity that we only experience when we have these conversations. Number three, integrity. So the internet is experiencing a lack of trust, huge lack of trust, crisis in trust. And podcasters, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, are considered the most trusted people on the internet. So when we create a podcast episode, we have to not only talk about it, but also show up in a way that we have to practice what we preach, right? And so in this podcast episode, I am practicing kind of ad-libbing a bit more, being a bit more on the fly, and collaborating with other people. So number four, accountability. You have to honor real responsibilities, right? We have to be accountable for the promises we make to our audience when we decide, hey, this is what the season is going to be about, or hey, this is when I'm going to show up in your podcast platforms, right? So that's exactly how we practice accountability, honoring exactly what he said we would do. Number five, community. I have never been part of a community that was as incredible as the podcast industry, honestly, because we're all passionate about what we do, right? And so you are able to actually create a space physically or digitally to be with other people that you resonate with, that you connect over. Number six, inclusivity. When you're creating a podcast episode, you should look at how diverse your guest list is, how mindful you should be of just people with different backgrounds. You should be able to include different perspectives. And so that's something that will enable us to become better through our life. Number seven, pragmatism. As you want to be in the world, not everything will ever go according to plan, but what can you do that is kind of helping solve that problem? How can you move forward? You will experience a lot of setbacks whenever you're creating a podcast. It just does. So it really helps you frame what you can do in a time where things don't go according to plan. Number eight, resilience. I love this because we know that to be a successful podcaster, however that means, to create something of meaning, you have to be persistent. So you have to stay consistent and deliver content in high quality. Make sure that you are sticking to the promise you made to your audience in the long term. You don't just show up on a Tuesday and then don't tell them you're going to be back until a month later, right? Whatever we promise, we have to keep and stay in the game. Number nine, imagination. I love how curious podcasters are. Truly, we are very, very interested in the world. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a show about learning more about your area or something else that is not related at all, like your hobby. So I think that you have to stay curious about what you're talking about. Otherwise, if we're bored, our audience is bored. And then number 10, hope. One episode, I think every single episode you create has the potential to drive action from our audience to create something that is meaningful. But also at the same time, we can hope for a better world, but every time we take action and do something that is going to make effectively the world a better place, we're being agents of change. And that's what podcasting is all about. All right. So thank you to the Obama Presidential Center for inviting me here. It has been such a wonderful experience. And yeah, check out their studios. The team has been nothing but wonderful. So I highly recommend it. And again, if you want to learn more about the podcast space, go to thepodcastspace.com/podcast. That's exactly where you'll be able to find other podcast episodes, and the resources in the show notes will include links to everything I mentioned in this episode. I've been Anna Xavier, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.